aku ka timata mo te karakia whakamoemiti te. So we're going to start by having a karakia or whakamoemiti, a blessing to start the session. Ka pai. Matua tama wairua tapu, ngā kararehe me ngā nehira pono, manakitea mai mātou I tēnei wā, piki tora, piki te kaha, piki te māramatanga I ngā wā katoa, ki nongi te matua, te tama, te wairua tapu, me ngā nehira pono, me te māngai, hei tautoko mai, ai nei, ake nei, ai. Kia ora tātou. Nau mai hara mai, welcome to our office, to our tari. We acknowledge the people of this whenua, the mana whenua, Ngāti Whātua, kia ora kei, e mihi ana. We acknowledge the moana, te waitemata that flows outside and beyond us, and the maunga, ngā maunga whakahi of Tamaki Makaurau that's around us. I welcome you here to our office, to KPMG, ko waiahau e tuake nei, he uri ahau no maunga taniwha te maunga tāpapa te awa hokianga whakapau karakia. So I descend from the mountain of maunga taniwha, the awa of tāpapa and the moana that is hokianga nui a kupe. My name is Te Aotearoa and I'm a director here at KPMG. Nau mai, hara mai. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thanks Te welcome everyone. My name is Kiwi and I'm an Associate Director in the Sustainable Value team here at KPMG. Just want to cover a couple of housekeeping things. So if you need the bathrooms, they're just across the lobby. You'll see a toilet sign just over there. In the event of an emergency, we just gather outside here to this open space. You can just follow any of us KPMG team on the way out. And we're really delighted to welcome you here to our space to launch this report today with Mindful Money and RIAA. I remember moving back to New Zealand 3 years ago, and one of the first things I did was discover Mindful Money and switch my KiwiSaver thanks to the work that they do. So I'm really stoked that we're able to host this today and play a small part. And really keen to hear some of the insights. It's amazing that it's been going for, they've been delivering this report for so many years now. So I'm sure there'll be some really interesting trends and things to see. So yeah, welcome and enjoy the rest of the session. Thanks, Barry.
Kia ora, ngā mihi nui ki koutou, ko Barry Coates aho, ko te kārahi o te patea whaiwhakaro. Hi, I'm Barry Coates. I'm co-CEO of the charity Mindful Money. I'm going to kick off, and my co-conspirator, Dean Hegarty from RIAA, will then do the second part of the presentation. So a warm welcome to you all. Thank you very much, Kiwi, for hosting us here at KPMG, and Te Ara for your very nice welcome. So thank you both very much. We're going to kick straight into the presentation. By way of background, this is, as Kiwi referred to, the 7th time we've done these surveys, which is absolutely wonderful because we've got great trend analysis and we're very careful about changing the wording too much of questions, and so we have a really good record now of the way that trends have operated and what's changed over the past 7 years. So let's crack into it. The context at the moment is for what we have euphemistically referred to as headwinds. I think Donald Trump needs a little bit more than headwinds as a descriptor. But some of the context internationally is criticism, attacks on the notion of investing ethically or through the use of environment, social governance factors, ESG factors. They've come under heavy fire in some Republican states. There are even some record of states banning providers from their contracts who are using ESG management. I guess from our perspective, ESG management is good financial management. It's not part of a culture war, it's the way one should manage finance. So we're a little surprised to see it. But in doing the survey this year, we wondered the degree to which this would have bled over into how the public thinks about responsible investing. So here's our top line. our top line is that 75% of people agree with the statement, I expect my KiwiSaver and my money to be invested responsibly and ethically. And that's firmly in line with the past 7 years of data. In fact, actually, the data increased until about 3 or 4 years ago, when it's maintained a steady level at around three quarters. And what has changed a bit is, as it's grown, the gap between male and female has grown. The strength of women's commitment to investing ethically and responsibly has grown, whereas men haven't. So I'll leave you to your own conclusions about that. But we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other demographics of it. So next slide, please. So the expectations for money to be invested responsibly or ethically, if you look at the top line, sort of intuitively probably you know that Gen Z is pretty keen on this stuff. But again, the gap between the generations has also risen over a period of time. And it used to be, when we first started doing these surveys, we actually described a bit of a bimodal effect, because we found some of the baby boomers actually to be stronger on investing ethically than Gen X and millennials. But that doesn't seem to have continued for some reason. By the way, I should say this data over 7 years has had a change of data providers, but many of the trends that we're talking about are very consistent, and we are very confident with the kind of the objectivity and representation of the data. So again, what we see is highest support amongst Gen Z and scaling down, and lower amongst baby boomers. Next, please. And what we then ask, so who's prepared to move their KiwiSaver? And what we find, again, is around 60% of people are willing to move their fund if they feel it's not aligned with their values. And I think we see some of that in the market. We also see a lot of people who say that they would like to shift but haven't done so immediately. So I think these things often take a while to work through. But again, this data has been stable over the past few years. So it is, I would say, slightly lower than Australia. If I recall rightly, Dean, I think the Australian numbers are a bit higher than this in terms of people who would then take action on a misalignment with their values. An interesting aspect that we ask about, and we will have a panel after this where we discuss some of the issues, and Kate, who's on the panel, will have the interesting response to this issue about if people knew that they were going to make a difference positively, would they save more? And I think it's a really interesting question. And it's interesting that the respondents who thought this most strongly were young people and people with low KiwiSaver balances, which we associate with lower income members of the public. And so this is kind of an interesting argument in saying that actually the reasons that people save are not only just financial, that actually they save because, or they could save more if they thought they could make a positive difference in the world. So that kind of brings us on to the next one, which is around willingness to invest to create a positive impact. And this is one of the issues that we've seen on the rise in surveys over the past 7 years. The number of people who are interested in investing for positive impact has risen. And as you can see, there's two parts of this. One is if the return is similar to industry benchmarks, and a smaller number is even if the return was going to be lower. Obviously what we see is that the kind of similar to industry benchmarks is far higher, which I guess makes sense. But in the lower return, those willing to accept a lower return are a lot of Gen Z, younger people, people who are more committed to ethical investing. So there's a sense of which you're seeing a different response depending on the strength of commitment from the people who are answering the survey. The interesting thing is if you also then say, well, who says no? It's a relatively small number. So that's, I think, a question that is now starting to be responded to by the investment sector. And many of you may know the examples of New Zealand funds that are starting to build in for positive impact investments into their portfolios, which may be social housing, for example, and particularly the example of Salvation Army's social housing bond for 118 houses in Tamakimakoro, and that really opened the door to other KiwiSaver funds and other investment funds starting to look more at social housing, and recently with the establishment of the Social Housing Agency, we're seeing a ramping up of the investment opportunities around social housing. So that's the kind of thing that we're seeing that actually for the first time now, people not only want to invest with positive impact, but there are now more and more chances for them to do so. This slide is particularly focused on dedicated funds, but then we move to the next slide, which is kind of around what kind of things do they want to invest in. It used to be that renewable energy was up the top over the time of COVID. Health actually became the most important issue for probably very good reasons. And subsequently, the others have been quite stable over time. So people love rivers and oceans, sustainable water management, renewable energy, biodiversity, preservation, conservation, etc. You can read the others down there. But for us, that's a kind of an interesting list. Not all of them have many investment opportunities associated with them. So there aren't necessarily going to be a whole lot of opportunities for people to invest in those. But I think it's a really interesting list for really what would people like to invest in? You know, are there going to be ways for example, people to invest in nature regeneration? Which is, I think, a really strong feeling from Kiwis that they do want those opportunities, and so I think we're starting now to see more and more kind of interest and action starting to happen in that space, and hopefully we'll get more of those investment opportunities coming through, and more mainstream funds going into that investment. Next slide, please. And this is really where we're talking about the mainstream funds. The issue is not only do you want to invest in a dedicated fund on positive impact, but do you want your fund that you're invested in to make a positive difference in the world? And in addition to the dedicated funds, we're seeing that people now have an expectation not only for ethical investment, but actually that their fund is delivering a positive impact in the world, and that they're telling their clients that, they're telling their investors that. And that's still quite rare. For those of you in the fund management industry, it's not often that fund managers are actually talking about what's the positive impact of my investment as a KiwiSaver investor or as a managed fund investor. And I think this is again a kind of strongly Gen Z, but actually this is a little bit more spread across all the generations. So I think the expectation is that people do want to know where their money goes, and they do want to know that it's actually making a positive impact. Next slide. They also want to know that it is having a positive impact on the climate. So we're seeing continued strong expectations around that funds will reduce emissions, and these are emissions not from the fund manager, but actually from the financed emissions from the portfolio of investments. And we now have, for the first time, climate reporting, and climate reporting should be providing some of this information, but shall we say that it's not immediately obvious from the first round of climate reports that this is actually being disclosed. But this is what the public wants. They want emissions reductions, they want interim targets, and they want commitments to drive emissions down towards net zero. And we're not yet seeing that from the investment community. And certainly we have separately coming up in a month's time or so a survey on climate coming up that will point out some of the data also behind this from the fund management sector. And finally from me, you've got some things that the public say, I want to avoid in my investments. And this has been a kind of question that we've asked in each of the surveys. There are three things about it. One is this is incredibly stable. These categories have not changed over time, despite, as I said, 7 years of data, and we changed over market research companies halfway through. The numbers hardly changed at all. They're really strong in terms of the stability of the data and the consistency of the data. They're also strong in comparison with Australia. So the numbers in Australia are far lower than that for people who want to avoid stuff in their investment. And they are across the generations and much more balanced male and female than some other categories. So as we see human rights violations, labour rights abuses, environmental damage, companies that don't pay their fair share of tax, testing on animals for non-medicinal purposes, social media companies, violations of the rights of Indigenous people, intensive livestock management. That whole left-hand side, if you will look, they're all about company behaviour and company practices. They're not about the kind of what people often associate with ethical investing. Remember the old days, people wanted to kind of avoid cluster bombs and tobacco. They're not on that left-hand side. What's there is actually something around the behaviour of the companies. It's much harder for fund managers to deal with because it's not quite as certain as you either produce a product or you don't. And so what we're seeing is these attitudes of consumers are really strong on those dimensions, but actually we're finding relatively few fund managers have clear ways to deal with those issues within their portfolio management. And with a few honourable exceptions, we do find a number of funds have quite a lot of their investment in these categories. And you can go and have a look on Mindful Money website and have a look at your favourite fund. On the right-hand side are much more the products and services, weapons and firearms, pornography, tobacco, gambling, etc. And those are perhaps more of the traditional ways of looking at screening out unethical investment. So that's it from me. I'll pass over to my colleague, Dean Hegarty.
Kia ora. Thank you very much, Barry, and kia ora, everybody. Moving right along, next kind of key finding, if we could just change the slide. over to the perceived barriers to responsible investing. So again, quite a bit of consistency in this slide and in these findings as we've seen in previous years. I think a couple of big things to highlight. One is, not enough independent information and also people not having enough time to seek that out. I think it really highlights one of the challenges we have, which is that people simply don't know where to go to find the right information that they need. There is a whole lot of information online. Mindful Money publishes a whole lot of information. RIAA has Responsible Returns, which publishes third-party verified funds. Sorted.co.nz has a whole lot of independent information. People simply don't know where to go, and as a consequence to that, it takes them a long time to find the information, and that makes them less likely to do anything about it. The other one that I do just want to point out, number 3, people don't have enough money in their accounts to even make it worthwhile looking. And I think that is something that we really need to start thinking about, particularly as the younger generations that we've highlighted who really think about this really strongly. If we're going to serve them, they need to have finances not just to support a more sustainable future, but also to support their retirement. So that's a really key piece that we need to start thinking about as we move forward. Next slide, please. On to greenwashing, which is an ongoing concern right across the sector. More than half of the respondents still do not believe the sustainability claims that are being made by fund managers. So that is a real concern. Trust in a sector like this is absolutely paramount. If you are going to expect someone to give you their life savings and to invest for their retirement, for their children's future on your behalf, they're going to need to trust you. One comment I would highlight is that this is not just a concern that we see when we survey consumers. When we talk to asset managers and RIAA benchmarks the asset manager industry every year, it is the single biggest barrier that asset managers highlight to growing responsibly invested funds. So that means that asset managers don't have confidence in what they're able to say when it comes to making sustainability claims. That makes it very difficult for them to educate their customers on those sustainability claims, and it really does speak to the fact that there's a big opportunity in New Zealand which doesn't have much regulation at all by the way of labelling. A lot of other international jurisdictions either have it or are bringing it in, but also that there's the opportunity for regulators to provide much clearer guidance about what is and isn't okay when you are putting labels on products and making claims that are associated with them. Next slide, please. What's quite interesting, I think, when you break this down, so a couple of pieces to this. One is that third-party verification is something that people then are able to lean on and use as a bit of a trust mechanism. So if they don't know where to go to find the right information, they don't have the time to look for it themselves, people are leaning on third-party verification. RIAA's got a pretty extensive certification program. Mindful Money's publishing loads of independently verified information on their website as well. So again, a lot of this information exists. What is quite interesting is that while if you look at the lack of trust, that's really consistent across all the different age ranges, right? Doesn't matter what age you are, you don't trust the financial providers and the sustainability claims they're making. The younger generations in particular place a lot of importance on third-party verification. And again, as that sector of the market grows, as their assets under management grows, again, that verification piece becomes increasingly important. Next slide. This slide really speaks to the importance and flows out of that greenwashing concern, which is that if we're going to have more trust in our products, we need to have transparency and we need to be able to see what's inside them. Independent verifiers need to be able to see what's inside the products. People need to be able to go online and see what their products are invested in. New Zealand's disclosure has better disclosure regulations than we see in some other countries, but there's absolutely more information that KiwiSaver providers, fund managers could be disclosing to their customers to make sure that they are able to have transparency about what they're invested in so that they can then make sure that those investments are matching their expectations. Into the financial advice findings, and there is some really interesting stuff here. I think probably the big thing here, we saw an increase in the percentage of people who had sought financial advice or who were seeking financial advice, but I think the piece that is really important for us to highlight here is that people by and large, those who are seeking advice are seeking that advice at a critical moment in time for them. Okay, so they are changing their mortgage, getting a mortgage, receiving an inheritance, setting up something for their children. It's by and large either once in a while or once off as the need in their life presents itself. And what that means is that there is a legacy to whatever outcome they receive when they get that advice. Okay, so if we don't give them great advice today, it's a problem for those people for years to come because they're only dipping in and out as their financial needs sort of desire it. So it does increase the pressure on us to make sure that when people are coming in, that they're getting the right advice, and it's the right advice for them going forward, and that has to include their values. Next slide, and really speaking to prioritisation, I think what we've seen is, again, really strong demand for the prioritising of returns, which makes a lot of sense when people are coming to get financial advice. What is really interesting is responsible investment options remain second in line. So good, strong understanding of responsible investment options, critical if you're going to give good financial advice. And that will really make a bit more sense even when we come to one of the findings coming up. Moving on to the next slide. I think one of the big probably slides when I went through it, there's a lot that jumped out at me, but I think it's borderline incredible that 41% of people said that their financial advisor just didn't even ask them what they were interested in from an ethics perspective. So I think from a business case perspective, if you are giving somebody financial advice, you are missing an incredible opportunity to understand that person, to build a stronger relationship with them, one that is going to last for a long time. People's values are enduring, right? Their short-term priorities, they change. So that is quite incredible. The other thing, I guess, that overlays that, you really aren't able to provide somebody with the appropriate financial advice if you do not understand what it is they want from the future. And so that's a really big call out to those, if you're a financial advisor in that 41%, but terrific to see that more and more are starting to do that, and that there's also a group of people who are who are having the confidence to bring it up with their financial advisors. But it's really important that we start to have those conversations so that we can start to get a better understanding about what people want going forward. I put in a teaser a little bit a couple of slides back about why it was that having good knowledge of responsible investment funds was key for consumers. A big part of that is the fact that what is an enduring finding now is that consumers expect that responsible invested products are going to deliver long-term returns. It's one that we've started to see gain traction over time. It's one that's matched by asset managers who tell us that it is the number one reason why they're investing more money in responsibly and ethically invested options, is because they see it as being long-term risk mitigation and being able to deliver long-term returns. So I think and we'll talk about this in more detail when we sit down, we saw 60% of respondents are perfectly happy to invest in these products and want to be included in them on the assumption that they deliver great returns. So the stronger that category gets, the more transition and the more shifting we're likely to see. I think, and just to end, again, a really exciting kind of piece which speaks to the timeliness of this. People are ready to invest now. They're ready to invest in the next 12 months. They're ready to invest over the next couple of years. So there's a job for all of us to do in terms of making sure that the demand is matched up with the expectations of consumers. But if we can do a good job of that, what this slide tells you is that not everybody, the vast majority of people are absolutely open to doing this, and not sure who's in the 4%, but I'm guessing that they live a pretty glum existence. Thank you.
Cool. Kate, do we want to? Yep. So, Kate, please join us. Lily, thank you.
Have we got another microphone?
Okay, yeah, sure. All right, you've got to go over. We can't have
You might want to move a little bit more that way. I think we've just put that in the middle.
Yep.
Have we got another? Oh, yeah, we can bring in a microphone. Cool. Yeah.
Sorry.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Kate Venel, tākou ingoa. I'll be facilitating our panel discussion this afternoon. I'm co-CEO of Mindful Money, working alongside Barry, which kind of means just doing my best to keep pace, or something like it, because he's incredible. I have a particular interest in human rights. I have 25 years of experience in financial services in both the UK and in New Zealand, and a particular passion for the role of advice and how advisors can actually become more skilled on ethical advice. So it was really interesting to see some of the findings there on advice. Our purpose for this discussion is to explore things from the survey and provide some ideas on how collectively we can better serve the majority of those survey respondents, given their strong expectations of responsible investing approaches. We've got Barry and Dean continuing. Barry bringing, as he mentioned, not only deep knowledge of this survey, but all the past 6 years of surveys, which I think is quite incredible. Dean bringing the views really from both sides of the Tasman from his role in RIAA as co-CEO. And I'm delighted that we've got Lily Richards, who's Creative Director at Pathfinder. She's responsible for launching their current brand and developing ethical approaches for products and communicating the impact that investments can have on our world. We also have deep expertise in how we can make complex information accessible to Kiwi investors. So Kate Hannah leads the National Strategy for Financial Capability at Te Aotearoa Retirement Commission, and she brings academic expertise and experience in government relations to this complex question of how can people access quality information to make better decisions. So I'll kick off the discussion with our panellists. The main rule I've set for today is I'd like us to minimise words starting with the letter T, because I think we are here today to really look at the long-term outcomes for consumers and the importance of ethical investing and how it can help mitigate risk. So we'll start with some questions for the panel, and then I'll open up to questions from the audience. If you're online, please put your questions into the chat, and Karen will select some to ask, and we'll also take questions from the audience, and we'll have a microphone if you need it. I will end strictly at 4:20, and I've got a little timer on my phone, so if you hear a buzz, that's what it is. Okay, right. So I am going to start with, Barry made the comment about, we are in a backdrop of what appears to be an anti-ESG, anti-woke capitalist, at least in the US, if not here. So it was really interesting to see that there was no evidence, apparently, of this in the survey. So I value a reflection from the panel on this finding, or about anything else that's really struck you from the survey. Yeah, starting with you, Kate.
Oh, thanks, Kate. Great name. One of the best. Thinking about you not saying any words beginning with T, as well as my lovely role at Te Aotearoa, I'm a historian, and that gives me an ability to think long-term and short-term about things. And I think what we've seen with the results of the survey show us that noise isn't always the same as data, and that we are, Aotearoa, New Zealand, a very specific place at a very specific time in our history, and people are making choices from where they stand and where they sit. And that understanding and knowledge of that level of subjectivity, that we have ability to speak to New Zealanders, to speak to ourselves, and tell stories that are about what we're doing now. And so I think that really reveals something to me, that we are seeing that still continuing level of support for those responsible objectives, despite the noise.
Cool.
Yeah, Lily.
Thanks. So I was just thinking about the ESG backlash component of that, and I think that it is partially reasonable to expect a backlash if you don't fully understand what ESG is and what it isn't. And I think there is a lack of consumer understanding about what it can do and what it won't do. So keeping in mind that it is analysing non-financial metrics, but with financial implications in mind. So it's not a proxy or shorthand for ethical investing. It's a tool that ethical investors and other investors can use. That was.
Yeah, thanks, Lily. Dean?
Yeah, I'd probably just add from, I guess, a more Australasian perspective, and a number of the people that we work with are really globally focused and a number based out of the US. I guess it'd be hard to underestimate just how big of a challenge that backlash is presenting with them. I think, in particular, we're seeing a huge focus around language and language being changed within the sector. What we're not seeing though is much change around actually good, strong financial management, good risk assessments, people understanding that actually DEI policies don't cause helicopter crashes or bushfires. And I think while it's good to see that that's not flowed through New Zealand. I think it makes sense that the New Zealand public is not sort of brought into that political discussion, which is great.
Barry, do you have anything you want to add?
Maybe just to say that I think we will look back on a period of history and acknowledge the pendulum swing, and we lived through particular blips in history, as Kate said, from a historian's perspective. And the thing about the survey that really encouraged me was that kind of concern over the wokeness of investment or anything isn't being represented in the public survey. And the survey was undertaken in mid-February. So if it was starting to be represented, we probably would have seen those results in the survey. And I actually draw a lot of comfort from the fact that there will be many places around the world that will stay strong on these issues, and certainly, for example, then I've talked about what's happening in the EU, which is some re-evaluation of the metrics that they're using, but actually not residing from the fact that they think this is sustainable finance and ethical investing is the right way to be pushing legislation and action in the EU. So, and we're seeing that across Asian countries as well. So that's the good news.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. The other kind of big thing that always strikes me from this survey is the repeated gap between intention and action. So Lily, I thought I'd actually like to start with you. Millennials, we can see the strong demand from millennials and Gen Z. I believe Pathfinder, you're very strong in attracting millennials. What is it you're doing, or what do you think are great strategies which would help reach those audiences?
For the millennial audience, I think there is a deep sense of foreboding. And I think that a part of that, a response to that, is around not overly focusing on the lack of impact you can have, but instead focus on the positive impact that you can actually have. Yep. I was thinking around this gap between the desire and action. So you're talking about where people want to do things versus what they actually show up to do. And that's beyond just millennial generation, so that's, broadly speaking, the consumer issues. And in that space, you sort of, there's a big gap between what people would like you to think of them versus who they actually are. And I think this shows up in the survey and the data, and it comes across in the work that we do as well. So there's a gap between who we say we are versus who we are. And I think as well you can see that in another issue around in marketing, you've got like this fancy circle, which is values circumflex, which is just a fancy circle, and you've got values, and the idea of benevolence or service to others versus service to self are oppositional, so they're directly in opposition to each other. And this is like a really challenging psychological issue that we have to overcome, that you can actually both be compassionate and prosperous. So this is a huge thing that we need to address, and I think with millennials as well, there's a huge trust issue that actually can occur.
It's an interesting point about compassionate and prosperous. Dean, I wondered if you had any insights, and maybe looking at an older cohort, of, is it this belief about returns? What is it that's holding back some others?
Yeah, I think what the data shows is that we need to do a better job of showing people where they can get good information. And there is lots of good information out there, but people don't know where to find it. So that's a gap for us to close. And then I think the other big gap is between people who are interested in this and are happy to do it on the basis that it's not going to impact their returns. And again, there's loads of good information out there that one, even if you look back historically, the returns are at least as good. RIAA does, again, benchmarking reports which show that, worst case scenario, you are doing as well as the wider market, if not better. But also there's loads of good evidence that if you look forward at a changing world as we start to transition to a lower carbon future, that all of these things are only going to become more compelling from a returns perspective. So I think for me the most exciting part of the findings are that huge group of 60% who, on the basis that they can be convinced of that, are happy to switch their investments and move. And that's, I think, the group that we really need to target.
I'm interested in how people actually find out or know about their KiwiSaver, and probably this is a question for you, Kate. How are we getting information out, particularly to those with smaller balances, those who are younger? What is the research showing from the Retirement Commission?
There's a couple of really important things. So people who we have expectations have lower financial literacy or lower financial capability. And I'm talking about societal expectations or how they might expect other people to view them. Are more likely to be the people who are directly impacted right now by the cost of living crisis and the broader ongoing social issues in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And what we do know from research is that when people are scared and feel afraid and lonely and like they're under threat, it's really hard for them to process information and take on board good new information. Then we have issues around things that I hear from people working on the coalface every day. So people have been encouraged when they go into the bank to change their KiwiSaver provider from whoever they've got it with to the bank provider, and then going, okay, well, it's the bank teller telling me this, so that's got to be a good idea. I've heard stories about people who've changed 3 or 4 times in the space of a year. So yeah, we know that this is a real issue, and that does obviously lower trust quite significantly. But the really great converse to that is that when people feel like they're under threat like this, when they feel like they don't have access to good information, when we make information really clear and really available and we give people time to process it and that it is verifiable by third parties, people are really good at making good decisions. And we actually need to talk about that more instead of making it that fear component. Say, you know what your values are, you know what's important to you, let us help you make that decision based on that. And so there's kind of that space for us to think about information as needing to slow down instead of speeding up for people to be able to make good decisions.
And there was the other theme that was about the belief that if your investment's going to have a positive impact, you might be willing to save more. I mean, Barry, maybe this is one for you to start with. The positive, we do, picking up your point too, Lily, about a lot of millennials feeling a little bit overwhelmed. Feeling like you can invest positively does feel exciting. So, yeah, do you want to talk more to that finding?
Yeah, and I think when we go out and talk to audiences, maybe that we're coming with a kind of an ethical investment billing or something, but we're much more likely to get people's interest when we start talking about how their investments can make a difference. What kind of issues are they interested in? A little bit like sort of slowing down and saying, so what's important to you? And then saying, well, how does this relate to your investment and where you put your money? And I think at that stage, rather than going in through sort of risk and returns and kind of saving for your retirements, it's much more identifiable, particularly for younger people. And so that's, when we did that question about would you save more if you recognise your investment as having a positive impact, I think it's really sort of starting to talk to how people relate to the issue of investment being accessible through stuff that they feel comfortable with and passionate about, rather than going in through financial measures and statistics and maybe people's concern about their retirement or something else.
Yeah, I can see. Do jump in.
Kate.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, very much at the Retirement Commission, we're thinking about making sure people have the best possible outcome for their retirement.
Yeah.
But actually, if responsible investment is probably most likely going to give people the best possible outcome and also drive engagement from exactly those parts of society that are the least likely to engage with financial capability, then it's such a shoe-in for us to really preface talking about that. So in the National Strategy for Financial Capability, we have a focus on young people, and we know that young people, from the evidence, from the data, really care about this and are much more likely to engage if they can think about how their money might make a difference and could actually change things. And we've seen that, you know, in a lot of the questions that have been asked over the last 2 years.
I see you nodding, Dean. Is there something you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's a question that we need to ask ourselves about KiwiSaver as a product, as something that's going to serve Kiwis in their retirement, and the quantity of savings that are sitting within it, or the lack thereof. And I think there's, one, you talk about the quality of your retirement. Like the average, we do need to be honest with ourselves. Like the average balance of a KiwiSaver for a New Zealander is about $32,000. A number of those people are going to have access to pulling that money out and invest it in the property market, not save it for their retirement. So I think until we're able to talk about and build up that pool, again, as a pool of assets, it's about 115 billion at last count. You don't have to fly very far to Australia where you see $4 trillion worth of assets, 6-figure average balances, and the ability of that money to do a lot more heavy lifting for the people of the country. And I think it would help us look after our retirement a lot better. But that also opens up a lot of opportunities to be able to invest in things that lead to a brighter future for the people who live here. And I think that's a huge opportunity that we need to talk about as well.
Lily, you're doing some of this in Pathfinder. Yeah, do you want to? Yeah, just jump in.
I agree with everything you've said. I think what's really important to remember though is my background's not in finance, and when I first came here and started working at Pathfinder, I thought, why can't all our investments be positive? This makes sense. Why not? And I get that from a layperson's point of view entirely, but you have to also remember, right, that there's a financial objective as well. It's a financial product, and you can't oversell the percentage of your portfolio that's invested in private assets. As much as I agree that it is a beautiful way in because it's tangible, so much of this stuff is fairly intangible. Very few people will get excited about the components of like manufacturing for a product, which is, the percentage, the largest percentage of your portfolio is in what I like to call beige investments, right? They're not something that people natively get excited about. So I think it's a responsibility of the fund manager to balance both the expectation of society, of which I believe we have as KiwiSavers, a moral responsibility to consider the future, the environment in which people are going to retire into, as much as their ability to save in order to retire. But yeah, you have to be balanced around what you're actually doing in an investment paradigm. So.
Great. I'd like to take some questions now from the audience, probably starting with the online, and I'll come to you in a minute. Have we got any questions online?
Yes, the question is it a fair summary of the report to say that people care about ethical investment and efforts to invest ethically are hampered by lack of information and that most financial advisors aren't helping out much?
Who wants to take that?
I'll give that one to Barry.
I think it's a little unfair to some of the financial advisors, including those in the room. But I think what is fair is to say that people care, and in many ways I would characterise it being a disjuncture between what people want funds to invest in and what they actually invest in. And it's not even so far as they have to invest everything in positive impact, but actually avoiding things that people really want to avoid is something that I sometimes kind of wonder why fund managers do invest in the stuff that they do invest in. And so I wouldn't entirely put that at the feet of financial advisors. I think that there is that disjuncture between customers and their providers in a way that I don't think you see so much in consumer goods sectors. For example, you know, in many other parts of the economy, if consumers want something, then the companies that provide those things act pretty quickly in order to respond. And I don't think that always happens in the financial sector. I think what we see is the financial sector saying, no, we know what's good for you, and you're just somebody who has these opinions, but actually we won't do what you want us to do because we've got our own theories, and so you don't have that responsiveness in the market. So to some extent, financial advisors are part of that equation, but I think they're also responding to the fund management sector as well as their clients.
Does anyone want to? Yeah.
Well, I guess the first thing that occurs to me when you make a comment about that disjuncture, Barry, is that there are characteristics of the financial services sector which are very familiar to me, having worked in academic science for 15 years, and that is the diversity of the financial services sector, the diversity of the academic science sector, both of which are improving, but you can't know where people are coming from if we go back to that idea around what we're talking about here from Aotearoa, New Zealand, unless you actually have familiarity with communities and different perspectives. And so we think we see that in the data, don't we, that women definitely seem to want to invest more in responsible investment, interestingly enough. So I think that's a sort of important factoid to kind of flag.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? Maybe take a question. Yeah. If you, we have got a microphone.
Kia ora, I'm Stella from EcoChoice Aotearoa, and I'm going to be cheeky and ask two questions. First one is, where do you think is the most pressing area of improvement for third-party certifications for financial products? And of the ones that you think are more rigorous, how can they be more meaningfully integrated into procurement and investment processes without becoming a compliance exercise or a marketing advantage?
Okay, I think that's really one question, so yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe Dean, I think you've got the microphone.
That was definitely two. That is one, really. I think what I'd say is, from a third-party verification perspective, there is actually a lot of buy-in to third-party verification across the finance sector. RIAA's certification program has just under 60% of the KiwiSaver assets sitting within it, and so a lot of the guidelines that sit within that, and we don't have anywhere near long enough to kind of go into the details of that, have been pretty well bought into by the sector. I think the biggest challenge for us in that area is, there's probably two. The biggest is undoubtedly that it is an opt-in process that people can choose to comply with or not. And so while we see a lot of improvement, and it's an opportunity, and as sort of global expectations have evolved, we've been able to see a lot of shifting around improving the quality of labelling on products, the quality of claims that are being made. At the end of the day, RIAA is a not-for-profit organisation that people opt in to have third-party verification for. There is the opportunity and the need for regulators to support some of the things that have global alignment, some of the things that are very consistent across Australia, America, Europe, and particularly big parts of the EU. So there's a huge opportunity there. There's much more alignment than people probably realise, and there is a lot of clarity on definitions. We need some more support from the regulator to, put their weight behind those, so that then asset managers and fund providers can have the confidence to say, this is what we're going to do, and when we say sustainability, when we talk about positive outcomes, this is what we mean, and we know that it's going to be of quality.
Yeah, and maybe that leads us to another consideration, which is there's greenwashing, there's also green hushing. I'd like to open it up to any comments on, have we got the balance right?
Yeah, no, you go first, I'll come back.
Greenwashing, everyone knows misleading claims of ethical performance. Green hushing is the feeling that people are so nervous about talking about ethical issues at all that they don't talk about it. And so it's a good question. I think we're in a little bit in a situation where both are going on, and that's quite dangerous. I think where it sometimes doesn't help is when regulators, and particularly the sort of most active regulator in our neighbourhood has been Australian Security Investment Commission, and they have been taking kind of exemplar cases on a kind of gotcha basis and saying, oh, we found you doing things wrong, we're going to take you to court, we're going to embarrass you, and we're going to fine you, and so on. As a way of regulating, I can understand why they're trying to take people out for an example. What would be I think far more useful though, is government set some clearer standards for what is ethical, what is sustainable, what are the basis for standards, and put them in regulation as the European Union is doing with its labelling schemes, and that now is starting to be the basis for more international regulation. So from our perspective, the green hushing is often associated with people who are really nervous that they're going to get hauled over the coals, not because they have done anything fundamentally wrong, but they've often got the details wrong and they've had some kind of technical breach that allows them to be hauled over the coals. And I think that's not necessarily regulation that is most useful for the outcomes that we want. I think the outcomes that we want is people to be able to trust ethical investment labels and then be able to invest in those. So I think there's a job to do in the type of regulatory structure we have, type of policy and regulatory structure.
Fiona, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, sure. I just have one following on. Given the survey's been running 7 years,
I just have a question to follow on about the greenwashing, green hushing around the percentage of concern. This year is 54%. I wonder if there's a trend. If you look back over the previous 6 studies, is that number sitting consistent? Is it changing, increasing, reducing? Do you have any feel for that?
Yeah, I feel like it's gone up. It held pretty consistent last year as well, but before that it had gone up pretty regularly. Is that a fair?
Right. Yeah.
Yep. And I might just to kind of carry on from Barry's comment, I think the absolutely need for guidance, regulation, really good. The call out is that we also need to be aware that the capital that we are investing on behalf of consumers in New Zealand, the vast majority of that is not staying in New Zealand, and so what that means is that when we are setting regulations and when we are creating guidance, it absolutely has to align with what is going on in other jurisdictions, because we are sending the money overseas. It's going into Australian funds, European funds, global funds, and so what we can't do is, and we are a little bit guilty of this here, being like, we're Aotearoa, we are super unique, it has to be our own thing, and that's really, really awesome. The difficulty is, it doesn't work if it doesn't align with a global system, which is where our capital is going. So getting that balance right is really important.
Kate, I'm really interested in your perspective. At the bottom of this is what do ordinary people who don't understand much about financial products anyway understand? How do we just do better on making it clearer?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, particularly around KiwiSaver. For many reasons, because of its name, there are reasons why New Zealanders might assume that KiwiSaver would automatically align with our values. And I think that's part of the issue that we've kind of gone through in the last number of years has been that as people have become more and more aware due to a series of different global events around KiwiSaver investments, perhaps that might contribute to an increase in actual distrust. But I have a distinct theory based completely on my own, observations that people think that KiwiSaver would align with your values because of the name. And so there's almost something that we actually have to think about living up to as a sector. What does it mean to be a KiwiSaver provider? It's the only investment product that every single person in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is going to have. Hopefully they're going to have a lot of other investment products as they go through their lives, but it's the opportunity to show what compounding interest does, build people's financial capability and their wealth, and then see them grow their savings beyond KiwiSaver. So if we get that right, we actually get so many things right, but there is a responsibility for the sector.
Have we got any more questions online? And then I'll come to you, Peter and Robin.
No more questions, but Roger, who asked the previous question, says the panel consideration of my rather provocative question was helpful.
Excellent. Peter,
Thank you, Roger.
My question is My question goes back to earlier on in the presentation. I think it was along the lines of, if my money could make a difference, would I save or invest more?
Yeah.
And baby boomers came out the worst by far. Speaking as an aged baby boomer, probably one of the few in this room, I'm just wondering whether or not that's partly because we actually don't have any more money to save or invest. And speaking as someone who's as committed to this area as pretty much anyone else, I haven't got any more to invest than I have now, so I'd answer that question, no.
Yeah.
So did the survey consider that, maybe ask the upstream question, do you have more to invest or save, and if so?
Barry.
We don't ask that follow-up question in the survey. We rely on perceptive people to ask it in the seminar, so thank you, Peter.
Rowan, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. Great survey. Always very interesting to look at what's changed and what hasn't changed. So quite a lot hasn't changed, but something that had changed is around the gap between men and women and the gap between younger generations and older generations both seem to be widening. I wondered if anybody wanted to expound on that a little bit. I mean, in that country in North America that we're not talking about too much, I've heard it said that young men are disproportionately moving away from some of these topics, and I'm wondering if that's what we're seeing in the data at all. Because,
I was going to try to avoid being the person who answered that question, but then you brought up young men moving away from these topics. Again, it's about noise. So what are they hearing online? Obviously, don't go online and look at what they're actually hearing online because you'll never recover. But that is also a responsibility for, when we talk about these things, to make it really clear that it's not going to, impact your masculinity if you support ESG. There's a whole finance bros on TikTok can get out there and tell some good stories. So I think it's a really important question, but again, I come back to that idea that we do have control over our own fates, and so the story is that it's not just inevitable. It's actually been driven by some of those social media companies that people said that they didn't want to invest in. And so there is an opportunity to ensure that we do at least start from here, thinking about what's happening in Australia and New Zealand, and talk about that by, starting out by watching adolescents and then talking to every boy you know.
I can see, Lily, you've got first-hand experience of this,
Not boys on the internet, but our Pathfinder, the KiwiSaver, is we have more female investors than we do male, right? And I think it's a really interesting space to investigate. I think my instinct and some of the research that we've done implies that women, I think, are more comfortable putting compassion ahead of prosperity if they have to, and we're trying to say you don't have to, but they will. and they will value compassion in a way that means that they're happy to make that decision. And I think we have to do a better job of convincing people that it's not a trade-off, that it's not oxymoronic. You can actually do both, and it is a process of constant adjustment. So you're always juggling those two things. The other thing that I notice in finance is that when you have more female investors, it can be a bit of a bummer because, the women earn less. So instead of going, a lot of, they're not a people aren't chasing them, put it that way. So I think we have a responsibility as well to serve women better and not just look at them and go, oh, well, they've got a lower balance, but to think, okay, well, how could we increase women's balances and honour the way that they want to invest?
Yeah. I think we'll wrap up in a minute, but I'll let you...
Can I just jump in on, and I guess it probably feeds into a bit of Kate's comment here. One other comment that's totally worth pointing out is that New Zealand has a pretty relaxed approach to what people can and cannot say on social media websites as it relates to finance compared to other countries. And so we don't take as seriously the idea of social media influencers providing quasi-financial advice without any qualifications or any understanding of clients. And I think if you look globally, that is an area that, of focus, and it is one that, as that younger generation continues to one, grow in terms of volume, but also in terms of their savings, is something that we absolutely need to talk about as well.
Very fun.
And just on the data, Rowan, it's quite interesting. The biggest gaps between men and women are not amongst Gen Z, but amongst the baby boomers. And it's those old men who don't believe in climate change and who start yelling at the television when te reo gets spoken. And you'll know them. But there is a certain older men generation that is really sceptical about this stuff. And I think that's where we get a lot of the gap is in the older generation with particularly the men who really don't kind of relate to this, and partly because I guess they feel that finance is something that shouldn't involve the consequences of where investment goes. Finance is just about risk and return, and to be fair to them, that's their education. That's what they've been brought up with, and that's what they've known all their lives. And so is it surprising that quite a few of them still carry that into their retirement? So I think that maybe is a perspective on the gender imbalance.
Okay, thanks, Barry. I think we'll close up now with just some concluding thoughts. If each of you could just 30 seconds, what are some of the things you want the audience to consider from the survey and should do better?
Sure, I'm just going to add one tiny anecdote about women because they have a magical power, which is that they can get the men in their lives to also join the KiwiSaver that they think is best. So we get a lot from there. I was just thinking it's a really great invitation to get into a position of good faith with yourself. I think that it is easy to be miserable nowadays, but what this shows is that there are really meaningful and swift ways that you can make sure that your money aligns with your values, and it's great to do something where you feel like you've walked the talk and you're in a good position with yourself and you feel like you have integrity. So that would be my encouragement. Check where you're invested and change it if you're not happy with it.
I'd certainly back up the points about the women in people's lives being able to influence them to do all sorts of things and make lots of great choices. I think my two big takeaways are, if you're a financial advisor and you're one of the 41% that doesn't ask your clients about their ethics or their values, I suggest you have a crack at it, because I think there's a huge opportunity for you if you do. And for the fund managers, I think what this data clearly demonstrates is that if you can demonstrate positive outcomes alongside strong financial performance, that there's a huge market waiting to get invested in your products.
Kia ora. I think my final comment kind of will draw from Lily as well. All of the research shows us that most people want to make what they think of as good decisions. And it is our job as people with expertise and access to knowledge to make it as easy as possible for people to make those good decisions. So the challenge to us when we look at this data is to say, what are we doing in our roles to make sure that people can see and assess and evaluate and do what Lily has said, make those decisions, and will empower people, but also most people just want to make good decisions. What are we doing to help?
And I guess sort of hopefully neatly following on from that, what we also find from the survey is there's a fair bit of awareness out there about ethical investment, but people still have a fairly shallow understanding of what it is and how to do it and where to go for information, as we've discussed, and what it really means, and you know, do you earn good returns and so on. You know, there's kind of they think you probably do, but they're not sure. And I think, you know, one of the things that would be great to do is to think of ourselves as ambassadors, to go out and tell others. And there are lots of different ways we can do that through the different networks that we operate in. But I really think there's a kind of far bigger audience out there for investing ethically than are currently doing so. And sort of the final slide that Dean showed, of all of the people who think that they might want to change in future, is kind of the survey shows that they're not doing so yet, and they're kind of, I think, often able to be persuaded when people tell them about stuff. It's the word of mouth. It's the trusted advisor, it's the friend, it's the neighbour, it's the family, etc. So, you know, a little bit of go out and please spread the message.
Great note to end on, thank you, Barry. So, in summary, listen to the woman in your life. She probably does know best. Right, so I just want to give a huge, big thank you to all our panellists, Lily, Dean, Barry. And a big thank you to you, our audience. You've been super engaged and asked some really great questions, so thank you. I'll now hand over to Te Are and Kiwi, and tēnā koutou katoa, and thank you again, and thank you to KPMG for hosting us today.
I should have said one more thank you is to our sponsor, MoneyWorks, financial advisory specialising in ethical investments. So they weren't able to be here today, but in their absence, very great thanks to them for sponsoring us. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou mahi anō ki tangata I kōrero mai tia mo te kaupapa nei. So just to acknowledge the panel and everyone who's gathered here today. I think what stood out for me is that having a conscience is prosperous. So you can be prosperous in your investment by having a conscious by investing consciously. And I wonder if we can amplify that through further thought leadership. That's something that really stood out for me, because from a Māori perspective, that's definitely where our values sit in terms of future investment, or we call it mokopuna investment. So investing in things that will be here beyond us. Just a couple of things that stood out, and of course that having women advise you on investment is a really good move. So I'll post this here this afternoon in Karakia, because we started in Karakia. So kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whaia tō tātou arekia I Ukraiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu ake, amini. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora.